Here on Freedom Watch, we keep track not only of expansions of the government in domestic policy, but the government's use of its power overseas as well. During the Bush years, it was commonplace for protesters on the left to condemn President Bush as an imperialist and to draw attention to excesses committed in the name of national security. That was supposedly part of the reason so many people voted for Barack Obama in 2008. But what has happened now that Barack Obama is actually the president? Has he given up any of the war-making or domestic security powers that President Bush used with relish? Or is he continuing the Bush foreign policy with just a toned-down rhetoric? Joining me now to talk about the Obama foreign policy are Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and Eli Lake, national security correspondent for the Washington Times. Eli, first to you. You wrote a terrific piece in Reason magazine, which caught the attention of many of us, the essence of which is President Obama has actually been more aggressive, more bellicose, just not as loudly proclaiming it than President Bush.
President Obama has asserted very much the same war-making extraordinary authorities as President Bush that he says derives from the authorization for the use of military force, which is the 914 resolution which gave President Bush originally and now President Obama the authority to go after the perpetrators of 9/11 in whatever countries they are all over the world, and pretty much with the same detention and now turns out assassination authorities that Bush used.
What are the things that President Obama is doing, Eli, that exceed or compound or equal what President Bush was doing?
Well, on the question of exceed, because so much of it is secret, but we can say that President Obama, and particularly Dennis Blair, the Director of National Intelligence, has asserted the authority to use drone strikes to assassinate or to kill American citizens who have joined al-Qaeda without any kind of legal process. That is something, as best as I can tell, President Bush may have at times fired into areas where there could have been U.S. citizens, but to actually sign a kind of executive order or an execute order against a U.S. citizen, I don't know that Bush had done that. And then as for issues of sort of detention, military commissions, the authority to hold people without trial indefinitely, Obama has asserted all of that in the context of the Guantanamo Bay debate. The only thing different in terms of Guantanamo is that he's moved and changed the location. More importantly, President Obama has asserted the same powers as Bush has after 2006 by saying he's allowed to do that because Congress gave him this authorization with what I call the 914 resolution. So I say that Obama has basically asserted a 914 presidency.
Jake, this is just sort of an open-ended opportunity to be as bellicose as he wants. There's no declaration of war. There's no target. There's nobody that can surrender. There's no end to it. If the authorization to use military force stays in place, written as it now is, then almost any president could shoot at almost anybody he wants in the name of national security.
This is a dream come true for any advocate of big government, omnipotent government, whatever you want to call it. I mean, he has the power, as Bush did, or claims the power, to be able to take out any person anywhere in the world simply on his label that that person is a terrorist. It's a total power to assassinate, to detain indefinitely, incarcerate, do whatever he wants, torture and whatever, simply without any due process whatsoever, Judge.
Well, if the Congress doesn't have this power to give, how could the president claim that he gets it from the Congress, Jake?
That's a heck of a good question, because he's never been able to establish any constitutional authority. What they essentially did, Judge, is they took a federal criminal offense, which everybody admits is a federal criminal offense because they're indicting and convicting people, for example, Zacarias Moussaoui and Jose Padilla and so forth. They take a federal criminal offense, terrorism, and they simply announce this is now an act of war at our option. We can treat somebody as an enemy combatant, criminal defendant, we can transfer them back and forth, and we can kidnap people, rendition people, torture people, assassinate people, including Americans, anywhere in the world because the entire world's a battlefield, including here in the United States.
You know, Eli, there's only one crime, you know this, and most of the people watching us now know this, that's actually defined in the Constitution. That's the crime of treason. And the Constitution says it shall consist of providing aid and comfort to the enemy or waging war on them, meaning the United States of America. And no one can be punished except upon confession in open court or upon the testimony of 2 or more witnesses. I mean, this is about as specific as you can get. There's nothing else like it with respect to any crime in the Constitution. We know why it's there, because of what kings and potentates in Europe did to their political enemies. Question: why isn't there an uproar of monumental proportion when the president says he can murder Americans because of what they thought or said or even did in foreign countries when the Constitution specifies that they're entitled to due process?
Well, I would say this, that from the Bush administration officials who began crafting the framework of what's called the global war on terrorism, what they would say is that they needed to have a war approach to this problem because they needed to prevent catastrophic attacks that would claim, casualties in the thousands. It's pretty obvious that Obama has also adopted this preventive approach, though he doesn't come out and say so as explicitly as Bush did around 2001 and 2002 and 2003. And as for whether or not there's an uproar, I mean, people often make the argument that in World War II, FDR rounded up Japanese Americans, put them in internment camps, which was a massive violation of civil liberties, but he did it by claiming war powers in the Constitution. The problem with the authorization for the use of military force, the 914 resolution, is that it's a war without geographic boundaries and really a war without any known way that it would end. What does it look like when al-Qaeda is finished? How do you know al-Qaeda is finished? It's an organization that exists as much on the internet as it does in the Peshawar Valley. So you know what the end of World War II looks like. It's a surrender ceremony.
Right.
But there isn't going to be one like that for al-Qaeda. So that's the real problem with the war powers attached to this amorphous war.
Jake, is Barack Obama just being a little bit more politically savvy about this than George Bush by not talking about it or boasting about it, but doing essentially the same thing, spying without warrant, detaining without charge, and as Eli points out in his article in Reason magazine, sending more drones to kill more people in the first year of his presidency than George W. Bush did in all 8 years of his presidency? Is it a question not of who's more unlawful or unconstitutional, but who's getting away with it because of their choice of words?
I don't think there's any question about it. I mean, he is more politically savvy, but there's also no question that this is George Bush's 3rd term, because Obama has embraced all of the wartime powers on this war on terrorism. As Eli says, it's a war without end. And he's changed a little bit of the terminology, calls it an unprivileged belligerent instead of an enemy combatant and so forth. But it's all the same thing. It's a sham and a pretense to exercise these unconstitutional powers, which, by the way, are redounding to the detriment of the American people, because it's making us actually less safe, not only at the hands of foreigners, but at the hands of our very own government.
Eli Lake, Jacob Hornberger, it's a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Judge.
You can catch today's show on FoxNews.com and on Sirius 145 XM 168 or online at FoxNewsTalk.com at 6 p.m. Eastern on Saturdays. From New York, defending freedom. Until the next time, stay free, America.